In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. The opening lines to a beautiful story. A story about us and God. It all began with an empty slate, a world without form. He was there, hovering over the waters, and he spoke. Let there be light. And it was done. He took the light and separated it from the darkness, creating day and night, and the stage was set. With the light and dark separated, he went to create the sky by dividing the water, and the land by pulling it out of the sea. Next was life, plants, trees, flowers, grass. He saw his work, and it was good. He continued. He added skies filled with birds and oceans filled with fish, lands filled with animals, and something more. He gave his first commandment, to go and make more. So the earth was filled with life. And then the story zooms into us. He created this garden stage, this platform for something. Scooping his hands into the earth, he formed a human in his own image.
Good morning, church. We're glad that you're with us this morning, whether in person or online. If you weren't here for our Zoom discussion last Wednesday night, well, you missed it. And we'll continue this morning study again Wednesday at 7 o'clock on Zoom. If you're not there this week, well, you'll miss it again. Try to imagine for just a second Paul coming to town today and trying to find a church. He stops at Starbucks because, of course, he'd want coffee. And he asks the barista there, "Can you tell me where the Christians meet around here?" And she said, "Well, just down the street at the church building." Paul said, "The what?" "You know, the building with the sanctuary." Paul said, "The what?" And she says, "Well, you know, the big meeting room with the pulpit." And Paul says, "Pull what?" And the barista said, "The speaker stand up on the big stage." And Paul says, "A stage?" And she says, "Well, you know, where the song leader stands." "The song what?" Paul answers. The barista, "You know, to lead the singing." And Paul said, "Oh, you mean the praise team." The point of all that is simply this. Paul wouldn't recognize most of the things that we do as a church. We can't imagine church without a pulpit, a song leader, communion trays, and a church bulletin, all those things that, we used to do when we got together for church. When the New Testament talks about the church, we filter that through that which we're familiar with. That makes it hard to hear some texts in the Bible about the church. When we read 1 Corinthians 11:22, "Don't you have homes to eat and drink in?" Some think, well, we shouldn't be eating in the church building, but can't mean that. They didn't have church buildings. Or in 1 Corinthians 11:33, "When you come together to eat, wait for one another." Well, if we didn't start church until everybody was there, we might not start church at all. In the New Testament, there are no song leaders or communion trays or pulpits or microphones. So where did the rules spring up about how those can be used? Where did the rules come from that says that only men get to do those things? Well, we made it up. And if we made them up, then it is okay and good and even necessary for us to go back and rethink those rules. And that's what we're doing in our study that we're calling Seen and Heard Women in the Church. So where do we go from here? Well, we go back to the beginning of everything, to creation. Genesis gets its title from the very first word in the book, in the beginning. Genesis 1 and 2 tells us of God bringing everything into being, including us. One would have to have no imagination whatsoever not to have a lot of questions after reading Genesis 1 and 2. What would it mean that there was a vault of water above the water? And how could God create light and plants before creating the sun? And how can there be morning and evening on the first, second, and third day before there was a sun? Of course, my biggest question is, how did God create a garden without having weeds in it? I'd like to know the secret to that. There are actually two creation accounts given in Genesis 1 and 2. There's only one creation, of course, but the camera gets positioned for two different takes. Genesis 1 positions the camera above for a wide-angle shot of the grand sweep of creation. Genesis 2 moves the camera in for more of a close-up, creation in the dirt, as it were. Both of these stories speak to the relationship of men and women today. After God creates the cosmos, he puts the cherry on top. Genesis 1 verse 26, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. We'll never know exactly why it was that God made human beings. We do know that he wants us to reflect his image in the world. God's power and his majesty are reflected in creation. The heavens declare the glory of God. At the first moment of creation, that was true and it's still true today. But his image, his likeness, is not seen anywhere in the creation. Not on the planets or in the plateaus or in the pachyderms or in the duck-billed platypus. What does it mean to be the image of God, the imago Dei? Well, look at Genesis 5 and verse 3, where that same imagery is used. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. Seth was Adam's likeness in his own image. That sounds familiar, right? Did Seth look more like Adam then than he looked like Eve? Well, it'd be a bummer if it was true in my family. No, it's what Genesis 1 said about creation. Everyone was created after their own kind. Seth was created after the kind of Adam, just as we are created after God's kind. We become his image bearers in the world. That means that we are spiritual. We have a spiritual nature that reflects God's eternal nature. So we are valuable. There is infinite worth to each and every human life. And we are responsible. We have the ability to make moral choices. Your dog may look guilty if it knows that it's done something wrong. Our dog could care less because she's dumb as a bag of hammers. But God not only holds humans accountable for our wrong choices, he only holds us accountable. Why? Because God makes us to make moral choices that honor and reflect him. We are the image bearers of God, different from all other creatures. We are the image bearers of God, and that is an awesome responsibility. And as we continue in Genesis 1, it speaks, the creation speaks, to the very topic that we're discussing. First, both men and women are the image bearers of God. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Both male and female reflect the same image of God. God created us to be like him, both male and female. It's emphasized in that verse. Male and female reflected the same divine image and divine nature. Maleness does not cause men to reflect more the image of God. Men and women both reflect that. A little later, the writer sums this up for us very clearly in Genesis 5 and verse 1. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and he named them mankind when they were created. Again, the text says that human beings were made to bear the likeness of God. And he stresses that's true for both male and female. Curiously, God names both Adam and Eve mankind. In the NIV, the Hebrew word is Adam, or the word for dirt. That is stressed, what is stressed here is the equality, the parity, the sameness of male and female. Secondly, God gave them a task that required both of them to complete. Verse 28, the first part, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." God made his image bearers, both male and female, so that they could fill the earth. God did not want just two image bearers. He wanted a world full of image bearers. My preacher, when I was growing up, argued that couples had to have at least 3 kids. Why 3 kids? Well, if you only had 2, you're just replacing yourself. You're not filling the earth. You're not replenishing the earth. You have to have at least 3 kids. Well, how many children did he have? Well, he had 3 kids. When the New Testament points back to creation, by the way, it doesn't stress recreation or reproduction. Paul and Jesus point to the creation texts, but in Genesis 2:24, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, when we hear that, we may instantly think about the coupling in sex, pretty much a requirement to be fruitful and multiply and finish the earth. But this is talking about much more than that. It's an emphasis on 2 human beings becoming a union and unity, one person. This speaks more to union and unity than hierarchy and leadership. Third, both male and female are given dominion over the earth. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God says, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit and seed in it, they will be yours for food." As the image bearer of God, humankind are given dominion and rule over creation. God left humans to rule over his creation in his name and in his authority. Now it's interesting, after he talks about specifically that Adam and Eve have rule over all of the animals, he only gives them green plants and the fruits of trees to eat as food. What was their rule over the animals then supposed to look like? God doesn't give them animals or meat to eat until after the flood in Genesis 9 and verse 3. Check that out and see if I'm right. Adam and Eve were vegan. And while you're checking, note that in Genesis 1 and verse 30, he says the animals, all of the animals that move on the ground, are given green plants to eat. Did that mean that the lions and tigers and bears all had a side salad for their food? Well, before we get lost, let's go back to the point. Dominion over the world is given to both genders. So, men and women together are the image bearers of God. Man and woman together are both to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Man and woman together are both to rule and have dominion over the earth. Now, we're not sure what they were supposed to do in their spare time. Genesis 1, however, the point is, seems to emphasize sameness, gender equality, and parity. Well, okay, but then doesn't Genesis 2 fill in the details and show Adam as being the ruler, as being the leader, as being large and in charge? Well, that is exactly the point that some would make from the story that's retold in Genesis 2. It goes back to show that God created Adam out of the dust of the ground, so he was created first. You can't get more primary than first. And Eve was made from Adam's rib, so woman comes out of the man. Eve was created as Adam's helper, so women were created for man. Adam gave Eve her name, just like he named all the other animals, which shows his authority over her. Doesn't all of that show that Adam was created primary, to be the leader? But look closer, and we find that those premises only work if you first assume the conclusion. Adam was created first by himself, and God said, that's not good. You could argue, I guess, that after God tinkered with the prototype, then he released human being 2.0, woman. Oh yes, Eve was created out of Adam's rib. Adam was created out of the dirt. But see, Adam took that creation out of his rib to mean something totally different. Adam said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. That emphasizes sameness. Well, but Eve was created as the helper. But just as 15 times that same Hebrew word is applied to God. In fact, most of the time helper is used, it is talking about someone who is more powerful, helping out someone who is less powerful. The next time the word is used, it's used by Moses, who said, God was my helper, as he was naming his son. Adam did name the woman Eve, which is Hebrew for, oh wow. Oh, actually, it's Hebrew for life. Adam didn't name the animals to show his superiority. They were brought before Adam to show Adam that he had no suitable helper. The point was, I'm not like them. And when Adam says, this is now bone of my bone, he's saying that Eve is like him. Genesis 1 and 2 shows that God made Adam and Eve as partners. There was no need in this perfect relationship, in this perfect world, in this perfect garden for leadership and power and hierarchy and a boss. God was the boss. Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony in their perfect world. But in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve sinned and their perfect world was broken. You know the story of the fall, the forbidden fruit, the snake, and the choice that changed everything. All of a sudden, Adam and Eve knew they were naked. What they knew was shame. All of a sudden, they're hiding from God because they know guilt. God had given them a perfect world where all of their needs were met. He had given them dominion over the animals of the whole earth. He'd given them every plant and every fruit of every tree to eat, except for one. And he gave them a promise. In the day that you eat, you will surely die. And that day, they began to die, to experience the curse of the fall. Now, in reality, it was not Adam who was cursed, but the ground, the entirety of creation was cursed. Verse 17, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. And you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return from the ground, since you were taken. From it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. The created world had been Adam's partner. Now it was his competitor. His job in Eden to dress and keep the ground largely seems to have been, okay, which fruit am I going to pick today? But now the ground would fight him tooth and toenail because the world had been broken by his sin. He would struggle to produce his food by the sweat of his face. Now, question, is that prescriptive or descriptive? Did that describe what would happen, or was that a command of God? Is it God's command that we sweat in order to earn our daily bread? Is air conditioning a violation of God's order? As I was typing this part of the sermon, the air conditioning in my office was so cool, I was about to freeze to death. Is that a violation of God's will? No, God is describing the results of the fall. The world was broken and it would make life difficult. But what about Eve? She wasn't cursed, but her relationship to Adam was cursed. Verse 16, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Okay, there is that pain in childbearing thing, and I'm not downplaying that. Remember, Adam and Eve were told in Eden that they were to be fruitful and multiply. It was always the plan that Eve would have children, but now they would carry with it much pain and much risk. Many women died in childbirth. Question, is that descriptive or proscriptive? Is that a command or just a description? Does there have to be pain in childbirth? Is asking for an epidural sinful? God said there's going to be pain in childbearing. Do you have to go through that pain, or can you take drugs? Hey, if having babies had been up to men, the world would have been a lonely place. Our point today is the broken relationship between Adam and Eve. God told Eve, your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Their perfect partnership that they had enjoyed in the Garden of Eden would now become a struggle for dominance and for rule. Eve would still desire the intimacy that she had with Adam in Eden, but Adam would rule over her and dominate her. This is the first time in Scripture that we see rule and submission between husband and wife, between male and female. And this is after the fall. It is clearly set out as the consequence of sin. So the same question bears, is this descriptive or proscriptive? Would we be sinning if we somehow lived our lives out without a power struggle? What if we lived out the golden rule? What if we sought to live out the second great command, to love our neighbor, to love our spouse as ourself? I'll admit, that's an awful lot easier to preach than it is to reach. But could it be that we've had the key to the battle of the sexes all along? What if we follow Christ so that there doesn't have to be a battle at all? Now, we'll come back to this story when we get finally to the New Testament and what Paul wrote, because he reflects back to creation. But as we end this morning, I'm reminded of an old joke. A Frenchman, an Englishman, and a Soviet were in a museum admiring a painting of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The Frenchman said, well, they must be French. They're naked and they're eating fruit. The Englishman said, no, they're English. Observe how politely she offers the fruit to the man. And the Soviet said, no, they're Russian communists. They have no house, they have no clothes. The point is, we can look at the story of Adam and Eve quite a bit differently. Some read it to see God creating Adam as primary and dominant from the very beginning. I don't. I read it like Adam read when Eve was created. She is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She was like anything else, unlike anything else in all of creation. Sure, there are differences between men and women, differences that are baked in by God in creation. And as the Frenchman might say in our story, viva la différence. But the differences of headship and submission and the domination of women that have taken place, that's because of sin. And wouldn't it be nice if there was some way that God could take away our sin?